Our opening words this morning come from my colleague, Leslie Takahashi. She writes, "To worship means to consider that which has worth." Today, we consider with gratitude the many gifts of this community, the opportunity to be affirmed in who we are, and to offer that affirmation to others. The chance to stand up together to remake the world in the ideal of justice, the freedom to choose one's own path to truth and to learn from the travelogues of others, the space to expand one's own spirit and to reconnect after busy or humdrum weeks with sustaining truths of one's life. Regular reminders that we must see our world through the lens of love. And the aspiration to consider all life as precious, for if all of it is made of stardust, and it is, how can it not be wondrous? So this morning, let's welcome all these gifts with gratitude, for they have been paid for with many currencies. The blood of the martyrs who died so that we can be free in our religion. The sweat of those who persist in justice's name against hostility and adversity. The tears of those who struggled to build better lives for those in this life. The questions of our children as they understand the world anew and offer their understanding to us as a fresh lens. The laughter and the joy of those giddy with the embrace of community. The dollars and cents of those who gave what they could and then stretched a little more. The infinite small acts of service that make the parts greater than the whole, done by those who knew themselves in sympathy with our purposes. So today we consider with gratitude and humility what it means to pay forward what has been paid forward to us. Now, with all of this, let us enter into worship with gladness in our hearts. Andy, would you come and light our chalice? Our shared symbol, Unitarian Universalist symbol, comes to us from the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee and the work of Martha and Reverend Waitstill Sharp, such a New England name, who used this as a symbol of refuge and assistance for refugees fleeing persecution in Nazi-occupied Europe. Our chalice lighting words are from Adrian Graham. We kindle a flame of power, illuminating the holy in each of our faces. We recognize in the flame a passionate commitment to our shared faith. We are held and carried from day to day, week to week, in the shining light. This flame is mine, as it is yours. We are brought together on this day, called to growth, to expansion in its glow. What does your heart know while beholding this holy flame?
First reading comes to us from Martha Kirby Cabo. As we enter this sacred, silent space, let us renew both our commitment and our covenant. There are those among us who have endured a loss in the past week. May their hope be uplifted again in this community of faith. There are those among us who have struggled with hardship in the past week. May they find renewed strength in this community of faith. There are those among us who have wrestled with questions, no answer in this past week. May they find sanctuary during their search in this community of faith. There are those among us who have cherished an unexpected joy in the last week. May their rejoicing be celebrated in this community of faith. As we commit to continue our free and responsible search for truth, may we covenant to honor the many paths that have led us to this community of faith. So may it be.
I invite you into a time of centering, meditation in the spirit of prayer with these words from Maureen Killeran. Here, in this space, we are gathered, called by our sense of urgency or duty or the longing for community, called to be together on this day. Here, in this space, we are gathered, called to hold ourselves accountable to our values, to remind ourselves of those hopes and dreams and possibilities for which sometimes in the rough and tumble world, it can be hard to hold on and believe. Here in this space, we are gathered, called to do our part in weaving a web of human community. Here in this space, some of us have come in pain, loss, fear about jobs, employment, the economy, the nation, or illness, or holding concerns for others, family, and friends. To those who are dealing with issues of health, we pray, we wish for courage and healing. May we pause and hold gently all the concerns, those we will name and those that will remain unnamed, gathered in this room, in this community, this day. In the complexities of community, it is right that in this space, some also come with joy bubbling in their hearts. May we rejoice together, remembering the wisdom that says joys are multiplied when shared. May we remember gratitude for warmth, thankfulness for the sunshine, appreciation for the simple tastes of whatever food our lives and bodies let us choose. Here, in this space, we are called to weave the web of human community. May we pause, and in our silence, may we lift up at least one blessing, one joy, no matter how small, that has touched our lives this week. May our shared silence be a blessing on our hearts, on this community, and may the blessing extend outward and grace the wider world. Thank you for your silence, for your quiet, for your joy and your faithfulness.
Our second reading is by June. In addition to the traditional concept of commitment, which means you're willing to die for what you think is right, make equal space for the womanly concept of commitment that means you're willing to live what you believe.
So last week I spoke to you about the saints who we haven't identified. haven't named as saints. Today, I want to talk to you for a moment about Dietrich Bonhoeffer as someone who we might consider for sainthood. You might recognize the name. A movie about him was just recently released. I did not see it. It came in for a fair amount of criticism, including from his family and the International Bonhoeffer Society, and from several of the film's actors who decried the film's appropriation by Christian nationalists. They criticized the misuse of Bonhoeffer's life and legacy by right-wing extremists. So many things misappropriated. I know of Bonhoeffer from reading some of his writings and those about him. He was a German from an upper-class, educated family who became a Lutheran pastor, somewhat to the distress of much of his family. Born in 1906, he and his family experienced the impacts of World War I, including the death of one of his older brothers. Bonhoeffer at this point was a nationalist, with views very much akin to American exceptionalism and manifest destiny, only for Germany. But he was curious and thoughtful and a theologian at heart. A few years after completing his doctorate in theology in Berlin, he came to the United States to pursue further studies at Union Theological Seminary. He wasn't particularly impressed by American students or the depth of American theological thought. But while there, he met Frank Fisher, a Black seminarian who introduced him to the African American church. Bonhoeffer developed a deep love of the African American church. He taught Sunday school at the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. I wish I could have seen and heard that. There's something about the combination of a German accent in Harlem, and there he met the pastor, met and heard the pastor, Adam Clayton Powell Sr., and heard him preach on the gospel of social justice. And he developed an awareness of the injustices that were experienced, and still are, by minority groups in the USA, and of the ongoing failure of the American churches to become integrated communities. The preaching in the Black church captivated him. His nationalism and his comfort with German militarism was profoundly fractured by watching All Quiet on the Western Front. And his views shifted. He evolved. His deep faith, coupled with his horror at the effects of war, led him to become, instead, a committed pacifist, finding that to be far more consistent with the heart of the message of Jesus and the value that Bonhoeffer had come to place on every human life. That resulted in his resisting the rise of the Nazi regime for a whole host of reasons, among them the subjugation of the German church to the German state and Nazi ideology, and its rejection of the Jews, even the Jews who had converted to Christianity and had become Christian clergy. He became part of a rump German church called the Confessing Church, a movement that rejected state control and sought to maintain and teach a non-Nazi Christianity. That did not go well. 2 days after Hitler became chancellor, Bonhoeffer gave a radio address warning Germany against the idolatrous cult of the Führer, which means leader, who could very well, he said, turn out to be Verführer, meaning misleader or seducer. The broadcast abruptly cut off. In 1933, Bonhoeffer became the first voice in the church objecting to the persecution of the Jews publicly, asserting that the church must not simply bandage the victims under the wheel, but jam a spoke in the wheel itself. In 1933, he took a position in London, serving 2 German-language congregations. But even there, he was harassed by the Nazi regime, ordered not to engage in unapproved ecumenical activities. He did not comply. In 1935, he was offered the opportunity to study nonviolence with Gandhi in India, but instead chose to return to the struggle in Germany, where he headed an underground and soon illegal seminary for the confessing church. Bonhoeffer struggled as a pacifist in a nation that was moving towards war, where so many Germans really still held those militaristic views. How does a pacifist resist? Persecution of the confessing church grew. Major figures in it were driven into exile. Karl Barth to Switzerland in 1935, and in 1937, Martin Niemöller, the author of that poem that you've probably heard, it starts, "First they came for." Niemöller was arrested. That same year, Himmler decreed that education and examination of candidates for ministry in the confessing church was illegal. Bonhoeffer continued on, secretly raising money and teaching. Around that same time, he published his best-known book, A Study on the Sermon on the Mount, in which he decried cheap grace as a cover for ethical laxity against the virtues of costly grace. The same problem still riddles much of American Christianity, where grace requires nothing more than saying sorry to Jesus, and then even the worst criminals and their crimes are deemed forgiven. Cheap grace. In 1938, Bonhoeffer, through his brother-in-law, learned that war was coming, and he was introduced to members of the German intelligence service, the Abwehr, who were seeking to overthrow Hitler. Now, war would likely mean his being conscripted, and that would, of course, violate his pacifism and his inability to swear an oath of allegiance to Hitler. Refusal to do so would be a capital offense. He left for the United States in mid-1939, but he returned after only 2 weeks. He wrote to Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a professor at Union Theological Seminary. "I have come to the conclusion that I made a mistake in coming to America this time. I must live through this difficult period in our national history along with the people of Germany. I will have no right to participate in the reconstruction of Christian life in Germany after the war if I do not share the trials of this time with my people. Christians in Germany will have to face the terrible alternative of either willing the defeat of their nation in order that a future Christian civilization may survive, or else willing the victory of their nation and thereby destroying our civilization and any true Christianity. I know which of these alternatives I must choose, but I cannot make that choice from a place of security." He was arrested, suspected of being involved in the plot by the members of the intelligence service who were trying to assassinate Hitler. 18 months later, he was executed, possibly after extended torture. The key points in this story are his honest commitment to his faith, his devotion to the love and pacifism that he found at the heart of the Christian scriptures, and his return again and again to serve his people and his faith. He did not go looking for suffering and death, but he was willing to risk it. Several branches of Christianity recognize him as a martyr. None of them seem quite to have bellied up to calling him saint. But if his story were not such a modern one, I'm pretty sure that he would have been recognized by now as a saint. We Unitarian Universalists also have martyrs, people who died for our faith, because they were that committed to our values. So I think it's important that we consider what it might be that we are so devoted to, what we believe in so deeply, what our values are, what causes we might care so much about that we would be willing to risk dying for them, not to kill for them. Deciding to kill people is cheap and easy. Human beings do it every day. For the most trivial of reasons, we're excitable and irrational. But the things that we ourselves are willing to risk dying for, that's a much higher bar. Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, is the 60th anniversary of the death of James Reeb. Today is the 60th anniversary of his assault by white supremacist cowards. He was attacked by surprise from behind, and he suffered fatal head injuries. He had gone to Selma, answering the call of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for white allies to come and support the civil rights campaign in that city. Now, he is not the only Unitarian Universalist who was martyred while supporting that campaign. Reeb's participation might seem less of a surprise. He was a young white minister serving All Souls Church in Washington, D.C., when he decided to answer King's call. He had already been involved in efforts to create more racial justice up north. Answering the call of love was predictable, perhaps. But there were lots of others who went. Time after time, I have met older members of our congregations who will sidle up after hearing some of these stories and say, I went to another place where some of the struggle went on. There were others who went, both ministers and lay people like Viola Liuzzo, a white Unitarian Universalist woman from Detroit who had also already been involved in racial and economic justice causes. After Reeb's murder, she participated in a protest at Wayne University and then called her husband and told him she had to do more. Leaving their children in the care of friends and family, she too went to Selma to help. She undertook to help shuttle people between Selma and Montgomery, a white woman driving black people back and forth. Not a safe thing to do. She was run off the road into a ditch by Klansmen who then came and fired into the car, killing her on March 25th. In Reeb's case, one of the murderers fled from Alabama to Mississippi to avoid justice. The authorities there did not return him for trial. The other three murderers were tried in state court, and the all-white jury deliberated for 90 minutes before returning not guilty verdicts. Liuzzo's killers were tried in federal court on other charges not directly related to her murder, and they were found guilty. They served several years in prison as a result. Two of them were also charged by the state for murder. One of them died of a heart attack before trial. The other was acquitted by the all-white jury, again after only 90 minutes. Reeb and Liuzzo were defamed after their deaths by white supremacists and in some cases by the FBI. Lies were told about them, what they'd been doing, how they died, who had killed them. Both of them knew that what they were doing was risky. Neither of them had gone there to die. Liuzzo, though, knew that Reeb had been murdered before she decided to go, and each of them left behind a beloved spouse and young kids. They are martyrs for their faith and their values, and for America's. Martin Luther King, in fact, preached at Reeb's memorial service. At our association's headquarters in Boston, there is this big plaque which has 3 figures on it, one of them on each side of Jimmy Lee Jackson, the young black man who had been beaten and then shot and killed by the Alabama state troopers the month before, which is what led to King's call for white allies to come to Selma. So the question for all of us is, what is important enough to me that I would risk dying for it? No one else can answer that for you. The hymn we sang earlier says, "You've got to do when the Spirit says do." You can see that in Liuzzo's actions. Reeb and Liuzzo and others heard that, and they went. They responded to the same moral call that Bonhoeffer described as jamming a spoke in the wheel itself. Where would we go? What would we do? Because it mattered so much that we would risk dying for it. Again, I am not asking about the things we'd be willing to kill someone for. There have been moments when many of us recently have felt that. That's an easy place for people to go. Too easy. We are not a peace church, a church strictly committed to pacifism, but we lean that way. And I think that we will remain there, leaning, but ethically unable to commit to strict pacifism, because sometimes we are left with no good choices, and the best bad choice is violence, as Bonhoeffer saw. I've spoken about Reeb and Liuzzo, but I want to observe that there are plenty of other Unitarians and Universalists and Unitarian Universalists who have put their lives on the line repeatedly over centuries for their beliefs, our values, our commitments. Their commitment was no less than those of Reeb and Liuzzo and Bonhoeffer. They too answered the call they heard and took the risks. Most of them didn't die. The point isn't going to die. And there are so many other people who aren't ours, but who we see also answering the call of love, which in some sense makes them ours. We draw that circle wide. Saints, perhaps, some of them certainly martyrs. May we discern what we are so deeply committed to that we would accept such risks, even seek them out, even when they are such obvious dangers, not with the intention of becoming martyrs, but willing to risk it, leading lives where what's left behind is the legacy of love, love answered. May it be so.